Happy Wednesday, everyone. Meteorologist John Homenuk with Empire Weather here with your latest agriculture long-range video update. Happy to join you guys today and hope you're having a great week so far. We're going to start off by looking at what the pattern has done over the last 14 days from a precipitation standpoint. Then we're going to get into the next couple days and then some major changes in the extended. Just a reminder on our videos here on YouTube, you can use the chapters at the bottom to skip ahead or behind however you want to go. We put these times in so that you can skip around however you wish. But let's get started. So here's a pattern over the last 14 days across North America, and there's a couple things that are going to stick out to you immediately based on this pattern. The first thing is going to be this area of drier than normal conditions, which has been very stagnant across the southern plains, extending from Texas northward into Oklahoma and Kansas, and then also extending into parts of western and west central Missouri down into Arkansas. This area has been abnormally dry. If we go back and look at even 30 and 60-day periods, and we look at the percentage of normal precipitation in this area, you will see this dryness, specifically in the 30-day, is very pronounced. Back to the 14-day, though, we can see the track of our storm systems that have impacted the agriculture belt over the last 14 days. You can really see where the ridging has been centered during this time frame. And this is almost just a retrospective to look at what the pattern has been doing, but it also tells us a little bit about what to expect moving forward. So there are the areas that have been hit and the areas that have missed across the agriculture belt. This is what we were talking about. In the last 14 days in particular, northern Missouri into central and southern Indiana and Illinois have been impacted by rains and have seen well above normal precipitation. The same can be said for parts of Ohio, northern Illinois and northeastern Iowa, as well as central Wisconsin, as well as a lot of the Dakotas and even parts of northwestern Nebraska. But there are areas that have missed as well. If we go and zoom into the central United States, you can see exactly those areas that have missed. Parts of central and western Iowa have missed out. Central Minnesota has missed out on precipitation. And despite all of the rains around the area, this area from eastern Illinois into west central Indiana has also missed a bit on these rains. And so these are just areas to watch as we move forward over the next really couple of weeks, getting into a pattern that's going to change pretty substantially. So what's coming the next couple of days? Let's look at the pattern here on the European ensemble. The pattern has been warmer than normal, and it's going to remain that way. We have a broad area of ridging across the United States, and temperatures are going to be warmer than normal, specifically in the southern plains. We know that. We've seen this forecast and this pattern kind of sticking around for the next couple of days. We know that the pattern is warmer than normal here through this week. It's also drier than normal. If we look at the next couple of days here, the storm track is to the north here. You can see really through Friday, the Canadian Prairie storm track, some residual moisture here in the southeastern United States keeping things active. But your main storm track is way north of the agriculture belt here, at least through the end of the week. That's going to change, though. We'll get to that eventually. Here are the temperature departures one more time, and I want to pull up the individual temperatures just to give you guys an idea of the fact that this is pretty substantial warmth. So your 6-hour max temperatures here on Tuesday, this is really, really significant stuff here in the southern plains. We're well over 100 degrees in many areas. You can see that warmth really very impressive. But really, the warm temperatures are focused in this area in terms of the big-time heat early on. As we move later into the week, as you see here, this is valid. This is for Wednesday today, and you can see the warmth is beginning to extend ahead of a cold front in parts of the Ohio Valley. We have some northwest flow cooling things down a bit in the northern plains, and we have that return flow coming around already back into the northern plains, keeping things warmer here as well in the 90s. As we get into later Thursday, you can see the warmth is back in this region again, with temperatures over 90 for highs. And then as we get ahead into the weekend, this is valid for Friday, you can see we again have big time warmth now starting to expand again all the way into the Midwest and the Ohio Valley as well. So basically all of this is to say, and again, Friday looks extremely warm. This is the European ensemble on Friday, the 6-hour max temperatures. If we look at the weekend here, this is some big time warmth for the Ohio Valley and the Midwest. I wanted to focus though on the overnight minimums, because here are your 6-hour minimum temperatures later in the week, and I think this is pretty significant. So this is Sunday morning. These are your minimums on the European model. This might be a bit overdone, right? But we're talking mid to upper 70s across a large majority of this region here, which is obviously not great for crop. If we go and check out the latest National Weather Service forecast, and we pull up specifically Saturday and Sunday, you can see the forecast isn't that much different. There are a lot of areas here within the crop regions that are seeing low temperatures that are near or over 70 degrees, and a large area seeing low temperatures well over 70. So even parts of, look at parts of western Missouri here, eastern Kansas, into southern and central Illinois and Indiana. These are low temperatures in the mid to upper 70s on Saturday and Sunday. These are, again, low temperatures. So important stuff and some stress coming to the crop here through the end of the week. I mentioned the stress maps. We talked about them in our last video. I want to pull them up one more time here. These maps are telling us how stressed the crop is across the entire agriculture belt, and generally values over 100 or 150 are pretty substantial. These yellow colors are 200, so looking at substantial stress to the crop across this entire region here, and this lines up pretty well if we go back and look at where the areas that have been driest, the long-term dryness, this matches up pretty well. You see that kind of bands of dryness coming into western Iowa, into Nebraska, especially into Texas, Oklahoma, western Missouri. And if we go back and look at those stress maps, this is exactly where we're seeing that boundary. So this lines up pretty well with what the models are telling us. Now, if we look at the anomaly, so how anomalous is this compared to normal, you can see that dryness and that stress on the crop has extended a little further north and east than normal. We're 50 or more stress degree days higher than normal so far. And this is the area that we've been talking about, right? Western Iowa, eastern Nebraska, down into west central Missouri, as well as parts of southern Illinois and Indiana. Now, extending into western Kentucky and Tennessee as well. So we know that we're kind of walking a very fine line right now where we've had the moisture to hold serve, and we've had the temperatures hold off. Now we're seeing this heat expand over the next several days, and it's going to be dry. So you can kind of sense the pressure building, right, with the pattern coming, and we're coming up to pollination in many areas. So that the stress is building because we have dryness and we have warm, very warm temperatures through the end of the week. But the pattern is going to change, and we're going to break down exactly why, and it's going to be pretty substantial. It doesn't take the risk out completely, but it's going to be a substantial pattern change. So let's go back and check out what's going on across the entire globe, and we're going to break down why the pattern is changing. So the first thing I want to do is roll this back. These are the sea surface temperature anomalies across the entire world. I'm going to back this up to the pattern that we had in mid to late June. Now, in mid-June, and even before that, we know that we had a pattern that was supporting ridging across the south central United States, extending into parts of the Tennessee Valley and even parts of the Ohio Valley at times. The West Coast was being impacted by occasional troughs that made it their way in from the Gulf of Alaska. This was sort of your mean trough position, and this was your ridge position. Now, that makes sense, right? Because we see these cooler waters here off the coast in the western Pacific. We see the warmer waters north of Hawaii, and that encourages a wave pattern that looks like this. This is what your wave pattern looks like with the cool and warm waters, and that encourages a general ridging position that looks like that with these warm temperatures in this general region. And the dryness really did build during that time. But look at what's happened since then. These cold anomalies, I want you to keep your eye right here specifically, and here, northwest of Hawaii. Look at what has happened to the pattern. All of a sudden, those cool anomalies have gone away, and we've seen a major pool of warm water build here, not north of Hawaii, but northwest of Hawaii. And we've seen warm waters make their way to the west coast of North America. And so what that tells us, in conjunction with the continuation of the La Nina, the strong trade winds, the continuing La Nina just pumping into the equatorial Pacific and acting upon this pattern, what that tells us is that this is what the configuration should look like. We should have a trough there. We should have a ridge northwest of Hawaii, a trough in the Gulf of Alaska or maybe near Alaska, and then ridging across the western third of the United States, not the eastern third. So again, this is going to be your general configuration right here. That's what this pattern tells us. The ridging should move back to the west. And so model data is coming in line with those overall thoughts. And this is why we've been skeptical of those forecasts that have been calling for this enormous ridge and this big heat and these major risks for a 2012 type scenario, because this has been happening for weeks now, and we're finally starting to see the models catch on to this general idea. So I want to go back, and I'm going to pull up the 500 millibar here on the euro and show you exactly what the model is suggesting is going to happen. So let's back up to North America, and here's our ridge right as we head into the weekend. So this is a warm pattern. right? But it's not incredibly warm, and you can already see these troughs coming down here into Hudson Bay because we're starting to get this trough here in Alaska that's shooting disturbances down. But the major change on forecast models that we've seen has been in the week 2 time frame during the early to middle part of next week. And keep your eyes on Western North America. All of a sudden, the models are shooting this huge ridge up as this large trough deepens in the Aleutian Islands west of Alaska. And that sends a large anomalous ridge northward. And if we back this up to a hemispheric view, there's even some blocking coming over the top from the Pacific Arctic regions that are going to impinge upon this. So we have a huge upper low signal here in Alaska and a big ridge off the west coast of the United States with blocking coming into the Arctic regions. And this is sort of the perfect storm to send disturbances down from Canada into the United States and change the pattern. And so that's exactly what the models are showing. I'm going to back up to North America here one more time. That's exactly what the models are showing. Here comes this troughing that comes developing in as we move into the middle of next week, and it even doubles down beyond that with this ridging hanging on here across the west coast of North America, this trough moving in here, and then this western Atlantic ridge signal, which we know the flow around these ridges is counterclockwise, right? That's pulling air into the East Coast from the Caribbean, right up into this general vicinity, all being exacerbated by disturbances coming down from the top of this huge ridge that builds into the western half of North America. And so that is kind of the perfect storm for an active pattern across a large part of the agriculture belt. Now, I want to roll this forward a bit and show you what the impacts are. So let's pull up the precipitation anomaly here. So the models initially start out dry. We know that that's part of the forecast here over the next couple of days, right? But starting this weekend, even as early as this weekend, we get a storm track that begins to sink southward. And you can see the reservoir of moisture here in the four corners with storm clusters coming over the top there into the weekend and the early part of next week. But then look at how the moisture starts to return in with this western Atlantic ridge building and sending this moisture around, and disturbances coming down from Canada and tapping into that reservoir of moisture. All of a sudden, you have a signal for a big moisture pattern across the ag belt. And that really continues as we move into the early part of August. If we go look at the height field here on the forecast models into the early part of August, our ridge that was once supposed to be somewhere in this general vicinity, earlier when we were looking at forecast models and the weeklies were signaling this big warm and this tremendous dryness, now it's all the way back to the west here, and we have a trough coming down into the Great Lakes and even parts of the northeast United States. The western Atlantic ridge is still sending moisture around, and that's going to lead to the possibility of storm clusters for several days. Here comes the storm clusters, the first one likely to be this weekend. So this is Saturday into Sunday. European models suggest thunderstorm complexes could develop anywhere from the Dakotas into Minnesota and make their way southeastward, dropping down into parts of the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Ohio Valley. This is, again, Saturday into Sunday, that first complex. But that front ends up down in the Ohio Valley somewhere midweek. And guess what? It's picked up monsoon moisture with it. So that moisture is now there. And we're also starting to get that return flow in from the Gulf and the Atlantic. And that front slows down. Look at how the models slow this front down, and they keep disturbances kind of meandering along this front during the entire time. And this is taking us all the way now into the early part of August, with the models suggesting that this frontal boundary and lower pressure will be centered around this region, and the moisture chances just keep coming. So when we look at our 7-day precipitation anomaly and we roll it into the early part of August, we have a very wet signal across this region. Really a lot of key important areas, essentially from the inland Carolinas and the Appalachians westward into parts of the Ohio Valley. So that includes parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, areas of Missouri, Arkansas even, and then of course southern central Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. A lot of key areas here now. Parts of the western belt might still remain on the periphery of this. There is a chance that as these disturbances come down, they don't necessarily pick the moisture up until they're past sort of this general dividing line. And the reason I mention that is because if we go back to where the precipitation has fallen over the last 14 to 30 days, this area has been dry. Parts of Minnesota into Iowa and Nebraska have been drier than normal. And so if we get into this pattern and that area starts missing out again, it could be, sort of a sleeper area of concern where we have dryness just persisting on the models. And the signal showing that moisture. Right now, it looks very good. Again, this is your 10 days ending August 3rd. it looks very good. But I just want to keep an eye on this western periphery because they can't afford to miss this rainfall. With that being said, it also looks like this trough is going to take the edge off the heat a bit because when it drops down, it brings some cool Canadian flow with it. And so at least through the first week of August, we are looking at a pattern across the belt that's going to trend cooler. It's not going to be cold or cool, by what we would expect in terms of sensible weather. But we're going to take the edge off the heat, and we're going to bring in the possibility of widespread precipitation risks during that time. Again, the 10-day anomalies really show this well with that moisture expanding across parts of the belt. There may be some drier risks that begin to emerge across the coastal parts of the Carolinas down into the southeast states, with sort of that frontal boundary remaining too far north for this area. That's something to watch moving forward. Meanwhile, parts of Texas and the southern plains still look to remain drier than normal. I want to touch quickly on the west coast as well, because when we look at the temperature profile into week 2, we mentioned that huge ridge building, right? Look what the models do with temperatures in the western United States as we move into the middle part of next week. This is extremely anomalous warmth, and it looks very likely that this ridge, as this ridge builds up in the western U.S., this area is going to just see a huge warm Pacific return flow and very, very warm temperatures take over this region through the late part of July and the early part of August, all while the agriculture belt gets into this more active pattern that will take the edge off of the risk in terms of rainfall. Looking ahead to the early and middle part of August, though, I just want to back up real quick, and we're getting a little far out there, but the models recently have come into better agreement on how this pattern is going to evolve. And one of the things that is eventually going to happen, it has to happen, what goes up must come down, is we're going to get a little bit more momentum in this pattern. And so this ridge that builds up here over the west coast of North America is eventually going to topple over. And it's going to find itself falling somewhere into North America. And so when that happens, we're likely going to see this ridge, the ridge that has built up here, start to shift a little bit further east. And that'll start to include parts of the plains, maybe the upper Midwest. And you can start to see that at the very end of the European ensemble, right? Because we've had this cooler, wetter pattern, but watch this ridge here begin to collapse as we move into the early part of August. And I think the risk that will begin to emerge as that occurs is that temperatures will begin to warm again across the United States. And it's uncertain what happens if this frontal boundary that has been providing this moisture begins to sink further south while that warmth collapses on top. It's possible that we'll start to see a warmer and maybe even drier pattern come back into focus as we move past the first week of August. But again, that's getting pretty far out there. We'll keep it on the radar and discuss it as we go through the week. But for now, again, the main focus is that huge change with the big blocking ridge in western North America, sending warmth into the western United States, and then sending a very active pattern into parts of the agriculture belt here as we move past the 25th of July to the end of the month. And again, it's all forced and focused by the development of this pattern in the Pacific, which is allowing this trough to get further west in the Gulf of Alaska, and the ridging to move further west as well, which is all allowing this moisture to come back here across the agriculture belt to end the month. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. We'll be with you all week. We're here to help as much as we can. And we know this forecast is changing. It's fluid. It's moving around all over the place. And we do our best to try to help you and walk you through the intricacies of the forecast, so to speak. But there are always questions. There are always things going on locally that we may not see on a national or regional scale. So if you have a question, please just shoot us an email or text message or even give us a phone call. We're happy to help however we can. That's all for us this morning. We'll be back with products throughout the day. For now, have a wonderful Wednesday morning, and we'll talk to you guys very soon. Take care.